Something else slightly contentious that I would like to be fairly clear about though, in bars 12, 14 and 16 there is an ornament on the first beat of the bar. For very many years most people have played those as a short sort of snap-off ornament like that, what you would call an asiacatura, a crushed-in beat. This is very unfortunate for two reasons. Firstly, because this piece, as we've said, is in a vocal style, that kind of ornament in a slow motet type piece really doesn't work. It's completely outside of the style, and it doesn't have that sort of baroque. Instead, what I would like you to do is play the note written as the small ornament as a crotchet or a quarter note, which then resolves onto the note that's written as the big note. So let's walk through that. We're looking at bar 12. You play the first beat with the C in the bass and the F. You play the second beat with the G that's written in the middle voice and then the top E, and then you move on. Bar 14, the same thing happens. You have the two Ds with the G on top, and then the A in the middle voice has the F on top, and then in bar 16 it's exactly the same thing again, moving on differently as it goes. I should perhaps earlier on have pointed out that as well as having this model of a vocal form of composition in mind when he was writing this piece, Sor was actually also looking back many decades, perhaps even a century or more, to an earlier style of writing. And he does do this very occasionally in pieces which, for want of a better name, he called studies. It's like a sort of retro feel, we would probably say nowadays. But he was looking back to this earlier form of writing, and I think it's very clearly important for us to notice that and to play things like ornaments and the overall style with an awareness of that looking back feel that the composer had. And you might notice that as part of that archaic style of writing, this piece is full of small examples of canonic writing. For example, all of this. It's a little bit of canon at the seventh where you have canon on seventh, depending on where you regard it starting. Similarly, coming up through here. That being more of a canon at the octave. The last two lines are a very special example of that. We'll come to that. Now, I'd like to draw your attention to bar 27. It's the one after you've done this. 27 is this bar. Now, in the Segovia edition, he suggests that you play the G chord on the beginning of bar 27 in third position, with the lower voices notated as minims. That's half beats. In all of the more urtext editions or the original editions, that chord is given as a crotchet, quarter note, with a rest after it. This is quite unfortunate because the whole point about this passage is that you have an upper voice and two lower voices, and the two lower voices proceed by minims and crotchets, and it's starting off that passage precisely as it does not carry on. So my suggestion is to follow Segovia's advice and do that chord there. Now, this passage starting really on the second beat of bar 26, through pretty well to the end. This is actually one of the most remarkable passages in the whole of the 19th century guitar literature, and it's one of the very few places where this composer really flexes his intellectual muscles and writes something which is both glorious to play and of course to listen to, but very, very clever, very brainy. If one wanted to be a a little bit fancy about it, you could call it double invertible counterpoint with one free part. Let me explain what happens in plain terms. For the first half of this passage, you have an upper voice, which then does its own thing for a couple of bars. That theme then reappears from bar 32, second beat, in the bass. All the way through the middle voice you have this descending chromatic scale idea, which then comes back again the second time. And then the other voice on each occasion is, as I said, free. So the first time you have just a bass line, and then the second time that the idea appears you have a free upper voice, and so on. Now what this means is that we have to work quite hard to bring out the voices which are the more important ones, particularly the thematic idea that stays the same each time, and also the chromatic idea down the middle. Now for the first time we play this bit, it does kind of look after itself, because it's easy to bring out the top voice. Obviously we have to work quite hard, mostly by just favouring the index finger, working quite hard to bring out the middle voice. When we play the second version of this idea, it's too easy for the top voice to be too prominent. So we have to work quite hard to bring out the thumb as you're going through here. And so on. So that's actually, from the technical point of view, probably the most difficult part of the piece to achieve as a musical result. The passage is not terribly hard to play, just in simple terms, but to bring out that musical effect, that is a fairly serious challenge and not to be taken at all lightly. Just a couple of final thoughts. If you think you're playing a piece in an archaic style, it's quite slow, one thing to look out for is the possibility of there being hemiolas. So when you're in 3-time, obviously you have 3 beats in a bar. With hemiola in this instance, especially near cadences, near the end, you can have a passage where for a brief time a rhythm of 2 beats is superimposed on the 3 beats in the bar pattern. So for example, if I look at the last 3 bars, I can count it as 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, like that. That's not something to bring out very strongly, but try to emphasise those minim half-beat rhythms just a bit. The other thing to aim for with the last 2 bars, you notice you have this tied F that comes over the bar line. And clearly if we were singing this and we were responsible for singing the middle voice, we would probably slightly crescendo the F as it went towards the first beat of the last bar. And of course we're not very good at crescendoing a note once we've played it. So one technique that you can use is to slightly overplay the F if you can, and then slightly underplay the C's so it has almost the impression of being louder than the C's when it gets there. And of course I point out that the grace notes that we have here in the last couple of bars are short grace notes. So I hope that gives you some ideas to work on with this piece and that you have a nice time with it.